Sergeant Anya Sharma believed there were two types of soldiers on this base, the ones who were seen, and the ones who were not. The seen soldiers were the ones with broad shoulders and loud voices. They were the infantrymen, the special forces operators, the ones whose dusty boots and confident swagger told stories of missions in faraway lands. They walked with purpose, and people stepped out of their way. Then there were the invisible ones. Like her, Anya worked in a windowless room in the heart of the base's logistics command. The air always smelled faintly of burnt coffee and ozone from the humming servers that lined the walls. Her battlefield was a spreadsheet, her weapon a keyboard. She tracked supplies, from bullets to bandages, making sure the seen soldiers had what they needed when they needed it. It was a job of immense importance, a complex puzzle of numbers and timelines that kept the entire military machine running. But it was not glamorous. There were no medals for perfectly balanced inventory reports. Anya was small in stature, with a quiet intensity that most people mistook for shyness. Her dark hair was always pulled back in a tight regulation bun, and her uniform, though perfectly pressed, seemed a size too big for her slender frame. When she spoke in meetings, her voice was calm and measured, a stark contrast to the booming tones of the officers around her. They often looked past her, their eyes glazing over as she detailed shipping manifests and cargo weights. She was part of the building's infrastructure, like the fluorescent lights or the air conditioning, but utterly unremarkable that the condescension was a daily annoyance. A low-grade hum of disrespect she had learned to tune out. It came from men like Major Reynolds, a man who seemed to think his position in public affairs made him a strategic genius. He had a slick smile and a way of calling her sweetheart that made her teeth ache. "Sergeant," he'd said just this morning, leaning over her desk and invading her personal space. "I need the latest numbers for the C-17 cargo loads. The general is coming for a tour and I want to look sharp." He hadn't been asking for the numbers. He'd been telling her to make him look good. Anya didn't look up from her screen. "The report is in the shared folder, Major. It's updated every hour." Right, he'd said, waving a dismissive hand. "Just have a summary ready for me. The simple version. Don't want to bore the old man with the nerdy details." Anya's fingers had tightened on her mouse. The nerdy details were the difference between a successful operation and a failed one, but she just nodded. Yes, Major. Arguing was pointless. It only made her look emotional, a word that was a death sentence for a woman's career in this world. Father had taught her to be strong, to be resilient. He was a soldier, too, a man of quiet courage who had taught her to shoot, to navigate by the stars, and to find her own strength, not in the approval of others, but in her own competence. He had a saying, "Let your actions be your voice." So Anya focused on her work. She was the best logistics non-commissioned officer on the base, and she knew it. Her systems were flawless. Her projections were uncannily accurate. The seen soldiers might not know her name, but their missions succeeded because of her silent, invisible work. She kept a small, smooth stone in her pocket, a piece of dark river rock her father had given her years ago. Whenever the frustration or the loneliness became too much, she would wrap her fingers around it. Its cool, solid weight was a reminder of him, a reminder of the real reason she was here. She wasn't here for the promotions or the praise. She was here for a purpose that burned quietly within her, a secret she held close to her heart. The day of the general's visit arrived with a flurry of nervous energy. People who normally slouched were standing ramrod straight. Floors that were usually scuffed were polished to a high shine. Major Reynolds strutted around like a proud peacock, his uniform so starched it looked like it could stand up on its own. Anya ignored the commotion. She had her work to do. A critical shipment of medical supplies was delayed by a storm over the Atlantic, and she was busy rerouting it through a different corridor, a complex task that involved coordinating with air traffic controllers on two continents. She was deep in concentration, her fingers flying across the keyboard, when a hush fell over the room. She didn't need to look up to know he had arrived. The shift in the atmosphere was palpable. General Marcus Thorne was a living legend, a man who had spent 30 years in the military, most of it in the shadowy world of special operations. He was a SEAL, one of the originals, and his reputation preceded him. He was known for his sharp mind, his intolerance for incompetence, and an almost mythical ability to see through deception. And this, General, Major Reynolds announced in a voice dripping with false confidence, is the nerve center of our logistics operation, where the magic happens. Anya could feel the general's presence before she saw him. It was a feeling of immense stillness, of focused power. She kept her eyes on her screen, her hands on her keyboard. She was in the middle of a critical data transfer. Looking away could corrupt the files, Sergeant. Major Reynolds barked, his tone sharp with annoyance at her seeming lack of respect. The general is here. Anya finished the command, her fingers hitting the enter key with a decisive click. Only then did she stand, turning to face the visitors. She kept her eyes downcast, a habit she'd developed to avoid appearing challenging. Major General. General Thorne was not a large man, but he commanded the space around him. He had piercing gray eyes under a furrowed brow, and a face that looked like it had been carved from granite. He didn't smile. He simply observed, his gaze sweeping over the room, taking in every detail. He barely glanced at the charts Major Reynolds was pointing to. His eyes were on the people, on the work itself. He walked slowly down the aisle, his eyes scanning the monitors. He stopped near Anya's desk. She remained standing, her hands clasped loosely behind her back. "What are you working on, Sergeant?" he asked. His voice was a low gravel calm, but demanding a straight answer. Before Anya could speak, Major Reynolds jumped in. "Sergeant Sharma is tracking a shipment, General. Routine stuff." The general's eyes flickered toward Reynolds for a fraction of a second, and in that glance, Anya saw a flash of pure irritation. He turned his attention back to her monitor. "It doesn't look routine. That's a Priority 1 medical cargo, and you're rerouting it through the North Atlantic corridor. Risque. Most people would take the southern route. Add a day to the delivery time." Anya was surprised he understood the complexities of the route so quickly. "The southern route has a higher chance of ground delays at the refueling stop, General," she said, her voice steady. "The northern route is clear. According to the latest satellite weather data, the supplies will arrive 7 hours sooner. Therefore the field hospital in Sector 4. The general stared at the screen for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Anya could feel Major Reynolds shifting nervously beside her. She had contradicted him, and worse, she had done it in front of the one man he was desperate to impress. The general gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. "Good call, Sergeant." He was about to move on when Anya, out of pure habit, felt a surge of anxiety about the transfer she had just completed. It was a nervous tic she'd had since she was a child, something her father had helped her overcome. With a little game, her left hand, hidden from the general's view behind her back, made a small, intricate movement. Her thumb tapped the side of her index finger 3 times, then once, then twice. It was a tiny, silent gesture, a phantom motion she wasn't even fully aware of making. It was a signal of confirmation, a way of telling herself, all clear, job done right. It was a signal no one else would ever notice, a signal no one else was supposed to know. But General Thorne was not just anyone. His eyes, which had started to move away, snapped back to her. They didn't look at her face, but at a point just past her, as if he had seen something in her shadow, in her reflection on the dark monitor. A strange stillness came over him. The air grew thick and heavy. Major Reynolds, oblivious, continued his spiel. "As you can see, General, we run a tight ship here. Efficiency is our middle name." The general didn't hear him. He was frozen, his gaze locked on Anya. He took a half step closer, his face a mask of disbelief and something else. Something that looked like a ghost from a long-forgotten past had just walked into the room. Slowly, deliberately, he raised his right hand, keeping it low, below the eyeline of the others. His thumb and index finger came together, and he returned the signal. 3 taps, 1 tap, 2 taps. Anya's blood ran cold. Her breath caught in her throat, and the smooth, cool stone in her pocket suddenly felt like a block of ice. The world around her seemed to dissolve. The humming servers, the fluorescent lights, the nervous face of Major Reynolds, it all faded into a dull, distant roar. All she could see were the general's eyes, and in them, she saw a question that reached across decades of silence and secrets. It was a signal known only to a handful of men, a signal used by a single SEAL team in the darkest corners of the world, a signal her father had taught her as a little girl, a secret game between a soldier and his daughter, a signal that was supposed to have died with him. The world came rushing back in a dizzying wave. The hum of the servers sounded like a siren in Anya's ears. Major Reynolds was still talking, his voice a meaningless drone. Anya's heart was hammering against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the sudden, terrifying silence of her mind. How? The question screamed through her, overriding every other thought. It wasn't possible. The signal was a private language, a silent conversation between her and her father. He'd created it himself, a modification of an old maritime code. It was their secret, a way for him to say "I love you" or be strong from across a crackling phone line or in a hastily written letter 3-1 to all as well. For General Thorne to know it, to return it with such precision. The implications were staggering. It was like hearing a stranger whisper a password to a secret chamber of her soul. Her training, her ingrained discipline, took over. Her face remained a neutral mask. Her posture didn't change. But inside a storm was raging. She met the general's gaze, and for the first time, she didn't look away. The question in his eyes was still there, sharp and insistent. "Who are you?" With an almost imperceptible movement of her head, she gave a single, curt nod. It was the response her father had taught her. The signal sent, the signal received, the signal acknowledged. The loop was closed. A change flickered across the general's face. The shock hardened into something else, a deep, guarded suspicion. He had shared a secret code, and a complete stranger, low-ranking logistics sergeant in a back-office job, had just answered him in the same language. In his world, coincidences like that didn't exist. They were threats until proven otherwise. He broke eye contact, turning away so abruptly that Major Reynolds, who had been in the middle of a sentence, stammered to a halt. "My office." "Now," the general said, his voice low and hard. He wasn't speaking to Reynolds. His eyes were fixed on Anya. A cold dread washed over her. This was not going to be a friendly chat. This was an interrogation. "General, of course, I can walk." "You over—" Reynolds began, eager to regain control. "Not you, Major." The general cut him off without a glance. "The sergeant." He turned and walked out of the room, his stride long and purposeful. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. It was an order, absolute and unquestionable. Anya's legs felt like lead. Every eye in the room was on her. The whispers started before the door had even swung shut behind the general. She could feel their stares, a mixture of shock, curiosity, and for some, a touch of malicious glee. The invisible soldier was suddenly, blindingly visible. She took a deep breath, the cool weight of the stone in her pocket, a small comfort. "Let your actions be your voice." She straightened her shoulders, walked past Major Reynolds's stunned, slack-jawed face, and followed the general into the hallway. The walk to his temporary office was the longest of her life. He stayed several paces ahead of her, his back a rigid wall of silence. The corridors of the command building were usually bustling, but they seemed to have emptied, leaving only the sound of their footsteps echoing on the polished linoleum. The office was a standard affair for a visiting flag. Office impersonal, with a heavy oak desk and a collection of flags standing in the corner. The general didn't invite her to sit. He walked behind the desk, turned, and faced her, his hands clasped behind his back. He stood there for a full minute, just watching her, letting the silence stretch until it was a tangible presence in the room. It was a classic interrogation technique, meant to unnerve and intimidate. Anya stood at attention, her gaze fixed on the wall just over his shoulder. She would not be intimidated. She had been through worse than the silent treatment from a powerful man. Finally, he spoke, closed the door. She did as she was told, the click of the latch sounding like a gunshot in the quiet room. When she turned back, he had not moved. "Where did you learn that signal, Sergeant?" he asked, his voice deceptively calm. Anya chose her words carefully. "It was something my father taught me, General." "Your father?" It wasn't a question, it was a statement of disbelief. "And who is your father?" "He was a soldier, sir." "I gathered that much," he said, his voice edged with impatience. "His name, his rank, his unit." Anya hesitated. This was the heart of the matter, the secret she had guarded for more than a decade. To speak his name here, in this room, to this man, felt like a betrayal of his memory. But she had no choice. The general had a look in his eye that told her he would tear this space apart to get the answer. "His name was David Sharma," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "He was a Navy SEAL." The general's stony expression didn't change, but something flickered in the depths of his gray eyes, a flicker of recognition, of pain. He leaned forward slightly, resting his hands on the polished surface of the desk. "David Sharma," he repeated, the name sounding strange and foreign in the sterile office. "I knew a David Sharma, a damn good operator, part of my team. A long time ago, they called him Doc because he could patch up a man with nothing but duct tape and sheer will." He paused, his eyes boring into her. "He died, training accident, off the coast of Virginia, about 15 years ago." "Yes, sir," Anya said, her throat tight. "He was my father." The silence that followed was different. It was no longer a weapon. It was a shroud, heavy with memory and unspoken grief. The general stared at her, truly seeing her for the first time. He saw the shape of her eyes, the set of her jaw. He saw the ghost of his friend, his brother in arms, looking back at him. "My God," he breathed, sinking slowly into his leather chair. He looked older. Suddenly, the granite facade had cracked. revealing the weary man beneath. "You're David's girl, Anya," she nodded, unable to speak. The fact that he remembered her name after all these years sent a tremor through her. "Remember him talking about you," the general continued, his voice softer now, lost in the past. "He was so proud. Carried a picture of you in his helmet, a little girl with pigtails and a missing front tooth." He looked at her again. "That signal, he told me he was teaching it to you. A little game to play, so you'd always know he was thinking of you. He called it the Guardian signal." Anya felt a tear slide down her cheek. She quickly wiped it away. She had not cried for her father in years. Crying was a weakness she could not afford. "Why are you here, Sergeant?" the general asked, his tone shifting back toward the professional, but the hard edge was gone. "Why the army? Why a logistics desk in the middle of nowhere?" This was the question she had been dreading. The truth was a dangerous weapon, and she didn't know if she could trust this man. Even if he had been her father's commander, the military had closed ranks after her father's death. They had offered condolences and a folded flag, but they had stonewalled her every attempt to learn the truth. "I serve my country, General," she said, falling back on the official. "Safe answer. Don't give me that recruitment poster nonsense," he snapped, his patience wearing thin. "A woman with your intelligence, with David Sharma's blood in her veins, doesn't end up tracking spreadsheets by accident. You're looking for something." He leaned forward again, his eyes locking onto hers. "You don't believe he died in an accident, do you?" The question hung in the air between them, a truth she had never spoken aloud to anyone. She had carried it alone for 15 years, a burning coal in her heart. She looked at the general, at the man who had known her father, who had fought alongside him, who knew their most secret code, and for the first time in a long, long time, she felt a flicker of hope. She took a deep breath, her fingers wrapping tightly around the stone in her pocket. It was time to let her actions and her words be. Her voice, "No, sir," she said, her voice clear and strong. I believe my father was murdered." The word hung in the air between them, heavy and irrevocable. "Murdered." General Thorne didn't flinch. He didn't show any surprise. He simply held her gaze, his gray eyes searching her face, weighing her words. It was a look Anya had seen before, in the eyes of old mechanics listening for the subtle flaw in an engine, or in bomb disposal tech studying a complex device. It was the look of a professional assessing a problem. "Tell me everything," he said, his voice a low command. "Start from the beginning, and don't leave anything out." It was like opening a floodgate that had been sealed for 15 years. The story she had replayed in her mind 1,000 times, the details she had obsessed over in the dead of night, came pouring out. She spoke not as a grieving daughter but as the analyst she had become, calm, precise, and factual. Started with the day it happened. She was a teenager, just shy of her 16th birthday. She remembered the 2 uniformed officers walking up the driveway, their faces grim. She remembered the way her mother had collapsed, a sound of pure anguish that Anya would never forget. The official explanation was cold and clinical during a high-speed maritime training exercise. Chief Petty Officer David Sharma's vessel had malfunctioned, capsizing in rough seas. He was trapped beneath the hull. A tragic accident. A hero lost. It never made sense, Anya explained, her voice steady as she paced in front of the general's desk. "My father was the most careful man I ever knew. He was a master seaman. He could read the water like a book. He taught me that you check your gear 3 times. Once when you pack it, once when you arrive, and once just before you use it." The idea that he would be on a boat with a malfunctioning engine, it wasn't possible. He would have known. The general listened without interruption, his hands steepled in front of him. He was no longer just a general, he was a SEAL again, listening to a battlefield report. Anya continued, her voice gaining strength as she laid out the facts. Then there were the inconsistencies. The report said the seas were rough, but the official marine weather data for that specific area, on that day, showed calm conditions. I pulled the records myself a few years later. The report mentioned 2 other men on the boat with him. Their statements were almost identical, word for word, too perfect, too rehearsed. They both transferred out of the SEALs within 6 months of the incident. One disappeared completely, the other went to a private security firm overseas. She talked about her own quiet investigation over the years. As a teenager, she had written letters, made phone calls, filed Freedom of Information Act requests. She was met with a wall of bureaucracy and polite but firm refusals. "The investigation is closed. The details are classified. We extend our deepest sympathies for your loss." "They treated me like a hysterical girl who couldn't accept her father's death," Anya said, a bitter edge to her voice. "They wanted me to go away and be quiet. But my father taught me to question things that don't add up. He taught me to look for the truth, no matter how well it's hidden. That was why she had enlisted. It wasn't patriotism in the traditional sense, it was a strategy. If the system wouldn't give her the answers from the outside, she would find them from within. She chose the army over the navy to avoid being in the same direct chain of command as the people she suspected. She chose logistics because it gave her access to a vast network of information transport logs, personnel files, supply chains. She knew that to solve a puzzle, you had to see all the pieces. She had spent years making herself invisible, becoming a ghost in the machine, all while learning how the machine worked. She finally stopped pacing and stood before him, her story told. The room was quiet again. General Thorne was silent for a long time. He seemed to be looking at a point on the wall, but Anya knew he was seeing something else, entirely a memory from a distant, violent shore. David was more than just a good operator, he said at last, his voice thick with emotion. He was the conscience of our team. In a world where the lines between right and wrong get blurry, he was our compass. He kept us honest. He looked up at Anya, and the general's mask was gone completely. In its place was the face of a man mourning his friend. I was his commanding officer. I read the initial report. I had my doubts too. Anya's breath hitched. You did. He nodded slowly. It was too neat, too clean. David was a survivor. If there was a way out of that water, he would have found it. And the two men with him, they were new to the team, eager to please, but they always seemed to be watching, listening. They didn't fit. He sighed, a heavy, weary sound, but I had no proof, just a gut feeling. And in this man's military, a gut feeling doesn't let you overturn an official investigation. I was reassigned a month later. By the time I was in a position to ask more questions, the trail was cold. The witnesses were gone. The files were sealed. He stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the manicured lawns of the base. I let him down, Anya. I let your father down. I got promoted, moved on, and I let his memory be tarnished by a lie. The confession hung in the air, a raw and painful admission of failure from a man who was defined by success. Anya could see the weight of that guilt on his shoulders. He wasn't just a general who had stumbled upon a secret. He was a man who had been carrying a piece of the same puzzle, a man who had been waiting for a missing piece to fall into place. And that piece was her. The signal, he said, turning back to her. Tell me about the signal. Anya's mind drifted back to her childhood. She described her father, not as a SEAL, but as a dad. She told the general about the treehouse he'd built her, the way he'd taught her to tie a dozen different knots, the quiet evenings they'd spent on the porch, him telling her stories. Of the sea he was gone so much, she said, her voice softening. The signal was his way of being there, even when he wasn't. He'd tap it on my hand when he tucked me in at night. He'd tap it on the phone before he hung up. It was our secret code. It meant I'm here, I'm watching over you. All is well. She looked down at her own hands. I started doing it myself after he died. It was a way to feel close to him. A nervous habit, I guess. A way of telling myself, all is well, even when it wasn't. The general listened, his expression a mixture of sorrow and a newfound resolve. The shared secret of the signal had forged a bond between them, a bridge across the years. It was proof of her identity, and it was proof of his connection to the man he had lost. You said you suspected people in his own unit, the general said, his tone shifting back to the sharp, analytical mind of a commander who. Anya took a deep breath. This was the most dangerous part of her theory, the one based on the least evidence and the most intuition. I don't have a name, but my father was working on something before he died. He was worried. He told me on his last phone call to always watch out for the smiling man. He said that the most dangerous threats don't come from the ones who snarl, but from the ones who smile while they betray you. She looked the general straight in the eye, Major Reynolds. He was a junior officer back then, attached to my father's unit for a public affairs project. He was always smiling, always trying to get close to the team. My father didn't trust him. He told me Reynolds was always asking questions that were none of his business. General Thorne's face hardened. Reynolds is a paper pusher, a political climber. He doesn't have the spine to pull off something like that. Maybe not alone, Anya countered. But my father was a threat to someone. He had discovered something he wasn't supposed to know, and Reynolds was there. He was the smiling man. The general was silent, processing this new information. The idea seemed far-fetched, but he had learned long ago to trust the instincts of the people on the ground. And Anya was David Sharma's daughter. She had his blood, and she had his intelligence. He walked back to his desk and sat down. He looked at Anya no longer as a sergeant, but as a partner. The invisible soldier had found an ally, All right, Sergeant Sharma, he said, his voice firm, decisive. You've been hunting a ghost for 15 years. Let's see if we can hunt him together. The air in the general's office crackled with a new energy. The weight of the past had been lifted, replaced by the sharp, focused intensity of the present. For Anya it was a feeling she hadn't experienced in years. The crushing loneliness of her quest had suddenly vanished. She was no longer a solitary ghost haunting the edges of the system. She was part of a team of two, against a conspiracy that had remained hidden for 15 years. First things first, General Thorne said, his mind already shifting from emotion to strategy. We operate under a strict protocol. As far as anyone on this base is concerned, our meeting today was about your performance. I read you the riot act for insubordination. You were disrespectful, and I put you in your place. Is that clear? Anya nodded. Yes, General. It provides a perfect cover. No one would suspect us of collaborating if they believe we're at odds. Exactly, he said, a glimmer of approval in his eyes. From this moment on, we do not meet in person unless it is an absolute emergency. We do not speak on the phone. All our communication will be done through a dead drop system. You know what that is? I do, sir, Anya replied. Her father had explained the concept to her through adventure stories he would tell her as a child. Tales of spies and secret agents. She never imagined she would one day be using the same techniques. Good, the general continued, his voice low and conspiratorial. In the base library, 3rd floor, history section. There's a row on the American Civil War. Find the biography of General Grant. Inside, you'll find a small encrypted flash drive. It contains a secure communication program. It's old, outdated by current standards, which is exactly why no one will be looking for it. It will route our messages through a series of international servers before they are deleted permanently. The password to access the program is a question. Who guards the Guardian? The answer is your father's call sign. Do you know it? Anya's heart skipped a beat. I do, she whispered. It was Pathfinder. The general repeated, a sad smile touching his lips for a moment. Because he could always find the way, no matter how dark it got. He leaned back in his chair, the moment of nostalgia passing as quickly as it came. Now, let's talk about Reynolds. You're right, he's a political animal, ambitious, slick, but he's also sloppy. Men like that leave a trail because they believe they're too smart to get caught. Anya felt a surge of validation. I've always thought so, but I've never had the access to look for that trail. My clearance level is too low. Every time I've tried to look into his file, I've hit a wall. That's where I come in, the general said. I can't just demand his file without raising suspicion, but I can create a reason to need it. He tapped his fingers on the desk, his mind working through the possibilities. Reynolds is in public affairs. He's in charge of the bases. Image, I'm going to announce a new initiative, a base-wide security review of all personnel with access to sensitive information. We'll say it's a response to a new threat assessment from the Pentagon. It's a perfect excuse to pull the files of every officer from major on up. Reynolds's file will just be one of dozens. No one will think twice about it. It was a brilliant plan, simple and elegant. It used the system's own bureaucracy as a weapon. Once I have the file, I can't just hand it to you, he went on, but I can leave it on my desk, and I can make sure I am called away to a very important, very sudden meeting, leaving my office empty for a short period of time. You, in the meantime, will be assigned to my outer office as temporary administrative support. A punishment for your insubordination. You'll be filing papers, a menial task to teach you some humility. Anya could see the pieces falling into place. She would be right outside his door, with a legitimate reason to be there. When he was called away, she could slip in, photograph the relevant pages of the file with a microcamera, and slip back out. It was risky, but it was the first real chance she'd had in 15 years. There's one more thing, the general said, his expression turning serious. We are entering dangerous territory. The people who covered up your father's death are still out there. They are powerful, and they are ruthless. If they even suspect what we're doing, they won't hesitate to eliminate the threat. That means you. He opened a drawer in his desk and pulled out a small, flat, black case. He slid it across the desk to her. This is a personal locator beacon. It's a civilian model, untraceable by military systems. If you are ever in immediate danger, if you feel you are being followed, if anything feels wrong, you press this button. It will send a signal directly to a satellite phone I carry with me at all times. It's a one-time use signal. If you press it, I will come for you. Do you understand? Anya looked at the small device. It was a stark reminder of the reality of their situation. This wasn't a game or an intellectual exercise. It was a life-and-death struggle against a hidden enemy. She picked it up, its plastic casing cool against her skin. "I understand, General Good," he said, standing up. It was a clear signal that their meeting was over. "Now, I'm going to walk out of this office. I want you to wait 5 minutes, then follow. When you come out, I want you to look shaken, upset, on the verge of tears. Can you do that?" Anya thought of her father. She thought of the years of lies, the condescending dismissals, the lonely nights spent staring at a cold case file. "Yes, sir," she said, her voice firm. "I can do that. Go to the library this evening. Get the drive. Our communication begins tonight. Your punishment and reassignment will be posted on the duty roster tomorrow morning. From now on, Sergeant, we are ghosts." With that, he walked to the door, opened it, and strode out into the hallway without a backward glance. Anya was alone. Again in the quiet room, the weight of the personal locator beacon in her hand, a heavy promise. She did as she was told. She waited 5 minutes, her mind racing. She replayed the entire conversation, memorizing every detail of the plan. She took a moment to compose herself, dredging up all the frustration and grief she had suppressed for so long. She let the mask of the stoic analyst fall away, allowing the raw emotion to surface. When she walked out of the general's office, her head was down, her shoulders were slumped, and her eyes were shining with unshed tears. She didn't have to fake it. The tears were real. They were tears of sorrow for the father she had lost, but they were also tears of a strange, fierce joy. After 15 years of wandering in the dark, she had finally found a path. Her father had been a pathfinder. Now, it was her turn to find the way. She walked quickly down the hall, avoiding the curious glances of the other soldiers. She could hear them start to whisper as soon as she passed. Let them whisper, let them think she was a broken, reprimanded subordinate. Their scorn was now her shield. Her invisibility was now her greatest weapon. That evening, she went to the library. The building was mostly empty, a quiet sanctuary from the rigid structure of the base. She found the history section, the air thick with the smell of old paper and binding glue. Her footsteps were silent on the carpeted floor. She ran her fingers along the spines of the books. The names of long-dead generals, a silent testament to forgotten wars. She found it easily. Grant, a biography. Her hands trembled slightly as she pulled the heavy volume from the shelf. She carried it to a deserted carrel in the corner and sat down with a deep breath. She opened the book, tucked between the pages, describing the battle. A Vicksburg was a small, black flash drive. She slipped it into her pocket, her fingers closing around it. She felt the cool, smooth stone with her other hand. 2 small objects, one representing the past, the other representing the future. One a memory of a father's love, the other a key to uncovering the truth of his death. She walked out of the library and into the cool night air. Above her, the sky was a blanket of stars, the same stars her father had taught her to navigate by. For the first time, she felt like she was finally on the right course. The hunt had begun. The next morning, Anya's punishment was the talk of the logistics command. The notice on the digital duty roster was stark and humiliating. Sergeant Anya Sharma was temporarily reassigned to the visiting generals, administrative staff for remedial training in military decorum and professional conduct. Major Reynolds was practically gloating. He sauntered over to her desk as she was packing her personal effects into a small cardboard box. "Well, well, sweetheart," he said, leaning against the partition with a smug grin. "Looks like you flew a little too close to the sun. I did warn you. The general doesn't appreciate being contradicted by the hired help." Anya kept her eyes on her task, her movements deliberate and slow. She didn't give him the satisfaction of a response. She simply placed her favorite pen, a framed photo of a sunset over the ocean, and a small potted succulent into the box. "Don't you worry," Reynolds continued, his voice dripping with false sympathy. "A few weeks of fetching coffee and making copies for the old man, and you'll learn your place. It's for the best, really. A good lesson in humility." Anya finally looked up at him, her expression carefully neutral. "Thank you for your concern, Major," she said, her voice flat. "I'll be sure to remember your advice." She picked up her box and walked away, feeling his arrogant stare on her back. His condescension, which once had been a source of deep frustration, was now a tool. His belief in her weakness was a critical part of her cover. He saw her as a defeated woman being put in her place. He had no idea she was a predator being led directly to the prey. The general's outer office was a small, sterile space, dominated by a large desk and a bank of filing cabinets. A stern-faced master sergeant named Peters, a man who looked like he had been born with a clipboard in his hand, gave her a brief, dismissive tour of her new duties. "Your job is simple, Sharma," he said, his tone making it clear he was not happy with this arrangement. "You answer the phone, you sort the mail, and you file these towering stack of folders that threaten to spill onto the floor. The general wants the backlogged correspondence from the last 6 months organized and archived. By the end of the week, do not speak unless spoken to. Do not enter the general's office unless explicitly ordered. Am I clear?" "Crystal clear, Master Sergeant," Anya replied, her voice meek. Her first day was a mind-numbing exercise in tedium. She answered phones, she sorted letters, and she began the monumental task of filing. She worked diligently, never complaining, playing the part of the chastened subordinate perfectly. She could feel Master Sergeant Peters watching her, his suspicions slowly giving way to a grudging acceptance of her work ethic. That night, in the privacy of her small barracks room, she plugged the encrypted flash drive into her personal laptop. The screen went black, and white text appeared. "Password required. Who guards the Guardian?" Her fingers trembled as she typed the answer. "Pathfinder." The screen flickered, and a simple text-based communication program opened. It was archaic, almost primitive, but she knew its simplicity was its strength. There was one new message waiting for her from Thorn's subject. "Initiative, the security review is a go. Files will be delivered to my office tomorrow at 1400 hours. I have a scheduled video conference with the Pentagon at 14:30. The conference is mandatory and is expected to last at least 1 hour. The office will be empty. Be ready, be invisible." Anya's heart began to pound. Tomorrow it was happening faster than she had expected. She spent the next few hours studying the schematics of the office building, memorizing the locations of the security cameras in the hallway. She knew there was a blind spot just to the left of the general's door, a small area the camera's sweep didn't cover. She would have to be precise, her timing would have to be perfect. The next day passed in a slow-motion haze of anticipation. Anya performed her duties with a calm efficiency that seemed to finally earn a nod of approval from Master Sergeant Peters. At 13:55 hours, 2 aides arrived with a trolley stacked high with document boxes, the personnel files for the security review. They deposited them in the general's office. At 14:25, General Thorn walked out of his office, his face set in a grim expression. "Master Sergeant," he said, "I have a conference with the Pentagon. I am not to be disturbed under any circumstances. Hold all my calls." "Yes, General," Peters replied, standing up. As the general walked past Anya's desk, he didn't look at her, but he slowed his pace for just a fraction of a second. It was her signal. The stage is set. Anya waited, her senses on high alert. She listened to the rhythmic clacking of Master Sergeant Peters's keyboard. The minutes stretched out, each one an eternity. She needed a reason to get Peters away from his desk. Her opportunity came at 14:40, when the printer at the far end of the hall began making a loud, grinding noise, indicating a paper jam. It was an old, notoriously finicky machine. "I'll get it," Anya said quickly, standing up before Peters could react. It was the perfect excuse. She walked down the hall to the copy room, her heart in her throat. She fiddled with the printer for a minute, making sure she was out of Peters's line of sight. Then, she slipped back out and moved silently to the blind spot near the general's door. The hallway was empty. Taking a deep breath, she slipped a thin piece of metal from her sleeve, a lockpick she had spent years learning to use. The lock on the general's door was standard issue, and it clicked open in seconds. She slid inside, closing the door behind her without a sound. The office was just as she remembered it, but now it felt like a sacred vault. The boxes of files were on the conference table. She quickly located the one labeled R. Her hands were steady as she lifted the file for Major James T. Reynolds. She didn't have time to read it. She pulled a tiny button-sized camera from her pocket and began photographing every page. Her movements were a blur of efficiency. Financial disclosures, performance reviews, transfer orders, commendations. She captured it all. She paid special attention to the records from 15 years ago, the period surrounding her father's death. Suddenly, she heard a voice in the outer office. Peters was talking to someone. Her blood ran cold. She had to get out. She quickly finished the last page, slipped the file back into the box exactly as she had found it, and moved to the door. She pressed her ear against the wood, listening. The conversation ended, and she heard footsteps walking away. It was now or never. She opened the door a crack, peered out, and saw that Peters was back at his desk, his back to her. She slipped out, closing the door with a silent click, and moved back to the blind spot. A few seconds later, she walked calmly back toward the copy room, holding up a crumpled piece of paper. "Fixed a jam," she announced as she walked past Peters's desk. He grunted in response, never looking up from his computer screen. She had done it. That night, she downloaded the images. The quality was perfect. For hours she pored over the documents, her analyst's mind sifting through the bureaucratic jargon, looking for the smallest inconsistency. For the most part, Reynolds's file was exactly what she expected. A history of a mediocre officer who excelled at networking and taking credit for the work of others. Then she found it. It was a small detail buried deep in a financial disclosure statement from 16 years ago, a detail that anyone else would have overlooked. In a section listing outstanding debts, Reynolds had declared a significant gambling debt to a casino in Atlantic City. It was a huge sum of money for a junior officer. But on his disclosure form from the following year, just 3 months after her father's death, the debt was gone, marked as paid in full. Where did a young officer with a modest salary suddenly get that kind of money? Anya kept digging. She cross-referenced the dates with Reynolds's travel vouchers from the same period. The records showed he was on duty at his home base in Virginia. But then she saw another document, a routine vehicle maintenance log from the motor pool, a log for a staff car he had signed out. The log showed the car had been driven over 300 miles on a weekend. He was supposed to be on base, a weekend just before her father's final, fatal training exercise. 300 miles. That was roughly the distance from the base in Virginia to Atlantic City and back. It was a thread, a tiny, fragile thread, but it was the first real piece of evidence she had ever found. Reynolds had a motive-crushing debt, and he had an opportunity, an unexplained trip just before her father died. Her fingers flew across the keyboard of the secure communication program. From Sharma subject, thread found something, financials and travelogues. He had a gambling debt. It was paid off right after my father's death, and he took an unauthorized trip to Atlantic City the weekend before. He lied on his official records. This is it. This is the start. She hit send, her heart soaring with a mixture of triumph and fear. The ghost she had been chasing for 15 years finally had a shadow, and she was about to pull it into the light.